What is a learning disability? The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, defines the term specific learning disability as a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written. IDEA provides that the disorder may manifest itself in an imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. Whenever we're talking about a specific learning disability, the other term that is used is just learning disability. You might also hear LD or SLD. A student's non-discriminatory evaluation team may determine that the student has a learning disability only under two circumstances, and we will get to that in a couple slides after this. One of the circumstances is inclusionary and the other is exclusionary. The student's disorder may include such conditions as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. This is the inclusionary standard. A student may not be classified as having a learning disorder if the student has a learning problem that is primarily the result of visual, hearing, or motor disabilities, or intellectual disability, of emotional disturbance, or of environmental, cultural, or economically disadvantaged. This is the exclusionary standard. It says that these causal conditions are excluded. Learning disabilities continue to be the most prevalent of all the disabilities. 35% of all students with disabilities served under IDEA have specific learning disabilities. 2/3 of students with learning disabilities are male. Asian students are underrepresented, while Black and Hispanic students are overrepresented in the category of learning disabilities. What a learning disability is not. It is not autism, it is not an intellectual disability, and it is not ADHD. If you have autism, you cannot have a learning disability. If you have an intellectual disability, you cannot have a learning disability. If you have ADHD, you can just have ADHD, or you might have ADHD and also have a learning disability. Learning disabilities are considered high incidence disabilities. So if you see the graphic below, this is from 2016-17, so it's not completely up to date. I know that our book is up to date, and it does state that the specific learning disabilities, it's 35% of all disabilities are comprised of learning disabilities. But if you see the graphic down below, it's clear that this is the most prevalent of the disabilities. So this is a breakdown of educational placement. So if you see by the graphic, 70% of students in regular class 80 to 100% of the time. So this is 70% of students who have specific learning disabilities. They are educated in the regular ed class 80 to 100% of their time. If you see the gray piece of the pie, 23% of students with specific learning disabilities are in the regular education class 40 to 79% of their time. 5% of those students are in regular classes 0 to 40% of their time. And then 2% are in separate settings. So as you see from this graphic, the majority of students who have specific learning disabilities are educated within the regular education class. So whether you are a special education teacher or if you would be a regular education teacher, you are going to have students who have specific learning disabilities in your classes. Students qualifying for specific learning disabilities. So there are two ways that we can do this. So there's the discrepancy model, the IQ or achievement test, and the RTI, which is response to intervention. So if you see by the bell curve right there, that is that's an average IQ. So you see the IQ score in orange, reddish, is 100. And then the yellow score, the reading score, is 100 as well. This is an average student. The student is reading on a 4th grade level, and they are in 4th grade. And the IQ score is consistent with the grade level reading ability. So this person would not qualify for a specific learning disability. So we're going to get into the discrepancy model. So the IQ score here is a little lower. Reading ability is a little lower. The student's reading ability is comparable to his or her IQ test. As you can see, they're both 85. They would not qualify for a specific learning disability. However, this student is a struggling learner, so we will need to accommodate in the classroom, provide more support for the student. However, this student would not qualify for a specific learning disability. Here's the discrepancy. So if you see this graphic, this student's IQ score is 100. So that IQ is average. That's kind of like the first graphic that we looked at. But then if you look down at the yellow reading score, that's a 68. So there's definitely a discrepancy because this student's reading score is about a 1st grade level. However, the IQ score is indicating that he should be reading at a 4th grade level. This student should qualify for a specific learning disability in reading because of the discrepancy. So the discrepancy model and the effectiveness. This is an established practice. It's easy to employ. The teacher doesn't have to spend a lot of time with it. As we'll talk about the RTI process, that's a little bit more in depth and a little bit more time consuming on the teacher's part. The school psychologist is typically the one that conducts the IQ and achievement tests. So the teacher just gives some data, and then the school psychologist kind of takes over from there to determine if there is a discrepancy and if the student would qualify for specific learning disability. Here's another model that's used to determine if a student has a specific learning disability. It's called response to intervention. So if you look here, I'm sure that you've all seen the RTI model, but if you look at the pyramid below, Tier 1 is 80% of students. This is all the universal interventions. This is all students. This is your main regular education class and curriculum. So if your school has a reading series and it's offered to all students, this is where that falls under Tier 1. Then you move up to Tier 2, and this is about 15% of students. These are targeted group interventions. So there's some students, they're a little bit at risk. They're struggling. There is frequent progress monitoring and assessments in this tier. Then if these students are still having difficulty in Tier 2 interventions, then they go to Tier 3 interventions. And this is about 5% of the students. These are intensive individual interventions. They're individual students and tailored to their need. They're assessment based and they are intense. and there's frequent progress monitoring, even more than in Tier 2. So a misconception that a lot of people have is that Tier 3 is special education, and this is not the case. So if a student is not responding to the interventions in, they go up the ladder. So if they don't respond to Tier 1, universal interventions or universal instruction, then they go to Tier 2 interventions. And if they do not respond to those interventions, then they would go to Tier 3 interventions. If they don't respond and the data shows that they're not responding to these interventions, then there would be a referral for special education services. So this is another model that is used.